blessed day to you all. My name is Lino from Sydney, Australia. Welcome to Pathways of Hope. Our gospel for today starts off with a prayer from Jesus saying, I give praise to you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, for although you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, you have revealed them to the childlike. You will note that the passages prior to this reading talked about how the people of his time, despite the miracles performed before their eyes and witnessing the fulfillment of John the Baptist's prophecy, still failed to recognize who Jesus was, the Messiah. Sadly, this was not the case just during Jesus' time. This is true even till this day. As I reflect on what Jesus said, I cannot help but look back on how I came to know our God personally. Having studied in a Catholic school for my primary and high school education, coupled with being raised with Christian values by my parents, I've learned a lot about God during my younger years. I must admit, though, a lot of this was more to do with what I knew in my head. I believed in the God who created me and the God whom I feared for my sins. Ironically, it wasn't until I went to a state university in the Philippines, wherein theology classes weren't part of the curriculum, that my faith grew. He helped me in my unbelief. It was then, amidst the so-called freedom of my youth, through the classrooms and hallways of this university, devoid of any semblance of religion, that I experienced the unconditional love of my God the Father. I knew in my heart that Jesus was real, and if I let him, he could transform me. Through the support of other young men and women who too had such a personal experience, I surrendered my life fully to God. This, I guess, was what they referred as childlike faith. Fast forward decades after, whilst now living here in Australia, an office mate of mine struck a conversation with me, asking curiously about my belief in God. He asked, how do you know there is a God? Is it possible that some of these religious beliefs were just created by men to satisfy the need to be able to explain some of the difficult circumstances in life? Rather than engage in a theological discourse, which I knew was not going to go anywhere, I just found myself replying, it might be difficult for you to understand, but I have experienced and witnessed myself countless times in my life, the things or the situations which can only be explained by God's love, mercy, grace, and power. One particular event that came to mind was how we ended up moving to Australia. I was working back in the Philippines in a role which I considered to be my dream job. I was working for a British company looking after the Asian region. Unfortunately, not long after, the company was bought out by the Dubai-based company. I was eventually informed that my role was going to be made redundant. My life crumbled before my eyes. Talk about worst timing. Only a few months prior, my wife and I decided to move back to my parents' house to help look after my bedridden father. My wife also had just recently resigned from her job to look after our 3 young kids. With tears in my eyes, I rang my wife and told her the bad news. To my surprise, my wife sounded very calm. After a few minutes of putting down the phone, she texted me saying, Daddy, God assures us that you will find a new job within a month's time. My initial reaction was, my wife was probably in denial, thus explaining her calm disposition. I could never imagine finding a new job within a month's time, knowing from personal experience that the application, interview, and pre-employment medical process easily will take weeks. That is assuming that the first application I submitted immediately translated into an offer. Such was my unbelief. Little did I know, God already had a plan. With the restructure in the company with the same company, due to the changes in ownership, several overseas roles opened up. One was a regional role like my previous role, but based in the US. Another was a global role based in Dubai. And a third role, a site-based role in Sydney, Australia. I applied for all three roles. Sure enough, on the 23rd day since being informed of the redundancy, I got offered the global role. And lo and behold, the following day, I got offered the Sydney role. It was humbling to be blessed by God, not only to be able to find a new job within a month's time, but to be afforded a choice. How could I have doubted God? A true manifestation of God's love, mercy, grace, and power. If only at that very moment I could have shared with my office mate the database of my life journey, seeing God's hand at work at every step of the way. I failed, though miserably, in converting a learned unbeliever that day. But I walked away from the brief conversation very grateful that God has revealed himself to me, even with my childlike faith. Jesus went on to say in the gospel, "Yes, Father, such has been your gracious will." I pray that you, my brothers and sisters, approach God with humility each day, not relying on your own understanding, rather walking in faith, a childlike faith. May all have a blessed day.